This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. Do you remember how you spent the pandemic? 4 years ago, Governor Gretchen Whitmer did the unthinkable. She ordered lockdowns. She divided a state of 10 million people into two groups, essential workers and the non-essential. Do you remember which group you were in? If you were non-essential, you'll probably never forget it. If you were essential, you had the right to keep earning a living. But if you were non-essential, you were told to wait home, watch the next press conference, and try to call Marvin for help with your unemployment. Stay home, stay safe, and wait for your $1,000 unemployment check from the government. For some people, this was more money than they'd ever seen. This, of course, threw a rock into the job market. It has yet to recover. Happiness is based on expectations, and when you let people earn $1,000 a week for 6 months for doing nothing, you'll have to drag people back into work when the money stops. For others, the $1,000 was less money. It was a lot less, actually, than they made living the life they had built brick by brick, decision by decision, and sacrifice by sacrifice. 2020 was not a courageous time in Michigan. We were stripped of our freedom. We had our Constitution suspended, all for the flu, repackaged and relaunched with a marketing campaign. It was 2020, but COVID-19 ruled everything. There's a cartoon from the time that stuck in my head. It showed a big boat on the water, and on the deck of the SS COVID, there were politicians, police, dancing TikTok nurses, and the media, there to record and repeat it all. On the water, there were life rafts. And in the rafts, there were normal working people like you and me. At the time, I was working at the Detroit News covering breaking news. Despite that media affiliation, despite getting a permission slip that allowed me to travel without the threat of arrest, I felt more like the people in the water. I still do. I probably always will. There was nothing secure about a newspaper job in the 2020s. I mean, just say it out loud, newspapers, 2020s. It just doesn't work, right? So not only are both Detroit newspapers poor, they're also disorganized because they're run by people outside of Detroit. So I worked at the news for a decade. Regularly during that time, budgets would come in so late from Gannett, the big partner in the partnership, that Christmas week layoffs were a regular occurrence. While people in actual profitable career fields would be taking home Christmas bonuses for their work, we were left to play a waiting game for pink slips at the Detroit newspapers. As you can imagine, this dynamic is not good for morale. It makes you look at your colleagues differently. You start to think about perhaps the weight they're not pulling. You start pocket watching. You start thinking that, hey, maybe if a few of those older, more expensive people leave, the younger generation like myself, and I was young once, would be safe. These were union newsrooms that ran on seniority. So if you'd been there since the 70s, you were safe, no matter your actual level of performance. If you got there a year ago and you were setting the world on fire, you weren't safe, no matter your actual level of performance. Seniority sucks if you ain't senior. So I was at a poor company in the midst of a pandemic. In my mind, there was no guarantee of survival. Not in good years, not in bad years, and certainly not in the year the entire global economy shut down. I was already sitting in the water. I didn't have much further down to go. It was a worrisome time. I liked my job. There weren't a ton of reporting jobs at the newspapers, and I had one. I wanted to keep it. Lockdowns to me pose a direct threat to my future. But the reporters at my paper who covered Whitmer didn't seem worried. Not for their own futures, not for the rule of law that the governor had suspended. They had no concerns that a single person was running the state. This was an emergency, and we were all in it together. Besides, Trump had called Whitmer that woman from Michigan. Reporters are supposed to cover people without fear or favor. But now that Trump had criticized Whitmer, there was a fear in the Lansing media. A belief formed that to criticize Whitmer during the pandemic would be to side with Trump. And no card-carrying, media badge-wearing Democrat could do that. And so overnight, The Lansing media began to explain Whitmer's tyranny and question anyone who dared to challenge it. Pop quiz. What's my test for how to spot a slanted story? I've talked about this several times by now. It should be pretty easy, but for those of you who are struggling, the test is this. Who does a story question and who does it explain? And so in 2020, the Lansing press explained Whitmer and questioned her critics. 2020 was a time when the 10 million people of Michigan needed a champion. It was a missed opportunity for the Michigan media. If reporters would have defended the rule of law at a time of global emergency, that would mean they would defend it anywhere, everywhere, anytime, every time. They would show themselves as the defenders of 10 million people, and they would be rewarded for it. We're told that media companies hit record numbers in 2020. But this was a mirage. This was all driven by a captive audience. There's a reason why, 4 years after record numbers, these same newspapers are peddling 6-month subscriptions for $1. When readers feel your work is essential, they'll chase you down the street to give you money, and it won't be $1. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. With the Constitution and their neighbors to defend, the Lansing media acted as Whitmer's press office. Let this be a lesson to you geniuses over on Fort Street. No good deed goes unpunished. Don't cheer for politicians. They're not known for reciprocating. Whitmer would have respected you more for hard coverage. She would talk to you because she would know that the alternative to not talking to you is way worse. She had no need, though, to speak to her press office. It's their job to make her look good. Smarten up. When the people of Michigan needed a champion, they didn't find them in politics or in the media. The Republicans who ran Lansing back then waited too long to push back against Whitmer. When they finally tried, they found themselves painted in the newspapers as bad men for deigning to question that woman from Michigan. No, when we needed a champion, we didn't find it in politics, we didn't find it in the media. We found that champion in ourselves and among our neighbors. Ian Murphy, owner of Iron Pig Smokehouse in Gaylord, found the champion within his self. Everybody had a tough time during the pandemic, but two fields were especially hard hit: restaurants and gyms. In a just world, restaurants and gyms would have been essential players. This was a respiratory virus that hit fat and old people the hardest. Who better to tighten waistlines than the gym? Who better to cook delicious and healthy foods than restaurants? Ian Murphy was one of our heroes of the pandemic. He didn't take a $1,000 unemployment check and shut his mouth. He didn't take a PPP loan and wait things out. He decided to risk it for the brisket. He kept his doors open, just as McDonald's and Wendy's stayed open, just as Target and Walmart and Meijer stayed open. 4 years after lockdowns, the defense from their defenders is, well, we didn't know much back then. But that doesn't make sense, does it? If you don't know something, a conservative approach is best. What never made sense was the idea that 10 million people needed to respond to the virus the same way. What never made sense was lockdowns, that all of us should stay home except for the essential poor who had to keep working. Lockdowns were not a conservative approach. There were so many exceptions to the rule that there was no way a global virus could have ever been contained. And so if lockdowns were the thing, central planning was the thing behind the thing. Central planning is when one person, Governor Whitmer, runs a state of 10 million people on her specific whims. Under the madness of Queen Whitmer, dispensaries were essential, but gyms were not. Liquor stores were essential, but schools were dangerous. We now know that 75% of COVID deaths involve people 65 or older. Most of the rest were fat people or people who had something else wrong with them. A lot of political capital, a lot of time, a lot of money was spent keeping healthy young people apart from each other. Meanwhile, Whitmer threw sick old people into nursing homes with other old people. And let's think about the person who goes into a nursing home. It's typically not grandma at the height of her health. So even to call someone at a nursing home a healthy old person is a bit of a misnomer. You're in a congregate environment because you probably can no longer take care of yourself and you don't have enough family around to take care of you. That's the reason people go to nursing homes. These are not people at the pinnacle of health. So nothing made sense. The more press conferences you watched, the more executive orders you read, the less it made sense. Let's be honest, most of you probably followed the governor's orders. Even at my old stomping ground, the Mackinac Center, the early response to Whitmer's orders was deference. There was a widespread belief in Michigan that governor knows best. It wasn't until the orders and the lockdowns and the shutdowns kept coming that people realized there was a problem. In time, the Mackinac Center's lawsuits would help end the governor's orders and strike down months of those orders as unconstitutional. What have we learned? Turns out there's no such thing as a months-long emergency. There's no such thing as an emergency that requires one person and their infinite wisdom to run a state themselves. Yet here was our governor, Big Gretch, clinging to power that she never had plans to part ways with. While the scales are falling from the eyes of the Mackinac Center and eventually the Republicans in Lansing, the media's mantra was, nothing to see here. Defer to Queen Whitmer in all things. She's just trying to save your grandma's life. When the Whitmer orders were struck down by the Michigan Supreme Court, Whitmer did the next obvious thing. She had the state health department issue pandemic orders. If lockdowns by the governor's hand were bad, using executive branch agencies was worse. Making an order that happens to be unconstitutional is one thing. It happens to the best of us. But being told by the courts that the orders are unconstitutional, then issuing substantially similar orders under an executive branch agency, which the executive of the state still controls, that's worse. This was Whitmer spitting in the face of rule of law. This was Whitmer saying, the court has made its decision, now let it enforce it. Ian Murphy was one of the heroes of our pandemic. Not just for slinging brisket, which by all accounts is amazing. I still need to make my pilgrimage up to Gaylord. No, what makes Ian a hero is that he fought the law and he won. A February 2021 editorial in Washington Post noted that there were 60 restaurants in Michigan that defied Whitmer's orders. The Post described the restaurants as openly and recklessly flouting orders to stay closed. The dispensary wasn't reckless. McDonald's wasn't reckless. Walmart wasn't reckless. The liquor store wasn't reckless. But a restaurant was the worst place you could be? Why? By order of the governor. Not because there were any facts of the matter. Not because restaurants posed any specific threat. Remember, at one point we were told that COVID could spread through gas pumps, and that was all fake news. So what Whitmer said about restaurants wasn't true, but it was true Whitmer said it, and that's what was printed. Some people don't take kindly to having their livelihood ripped away. Ian Murphy is one of those people. Taking great personal, social, and financial risk, he defied Whitmer. He risked it for the brisket. He kept Iron Pig open and continued to feed his community. In so doing, Murphy and Iron Pig became a lightning rod. Among enjoyers like ourselves, Murphy's actions were heroic. What made Murphy heroic is not that he stood up for all restaurants in Michigan. He didn't. No, Ian Murphy was standing up for himself first and foremost. He was standing up for his right to earn a living, to earn more than the $1,000 a week the government would give him, or perhaps earn nothing if no one showed up, to take that risk, the right to try. There's no guarantees in business, not for me in podcasting, not for Ray Kroc at McDonald's, not for Ian Murphy at Iron Pig. All he wanted is what we take for granted, the right to succeed or fail on our own merits. Maybe people won't like the podcast. Maybe we tell too much truth. Maybe people won't like the brisket. Maybe it's too delicious. But freedom is the right to try. And the right to try is what Whitmer took from us. Men like Murphy are heroes because they snatched their rights back. Murphy sued for and won freedom from a gathering statute that enabled his local health department to issue the same kind of pandemic orders that once came from Whitmer and then the state health department. Government, of course, does not take kindly to people who fight for their rights. We even have two phrases for this, and we say them often. One, you can't fight City Hall. Another one, I fought the law and the law won. Every time we repeat these phrases, we're admitting to a rotten dynamic. We're accepting the unacceptable. We should stop doing it. It's actually not okay that government officials act as bullies in their official office. What those phrases mean is government offices will identify enemies of the state and then use the full power of the state to lean on them. It'll padlock doors and issue legal orders and go after professional licenses. It'll apply pressure locally and in Lansing. Next thing you know, the news stories are treating you as enemy of the state because a lazy reporter got a press release describing you that way. A person is hit for so many powerful attacks from so many angles that they do what most people do. They take the $1,000 check. They apply for the PPP loans. They keep their mouths shut. These people, when you do that, when you take that money, you're no longer in business. You're in league with the government. Your work no longer decides your earnings, but your political affiliations. You no longer serve your community. You serve the whims of politicians who have given you your daily bread. Business owners like Ian Murphy and Carl the Barber, a man named Carl Mankey, were identified during the pandemic as enemies of the state. Their crime was daring to work and put food on the table despite order of the governor. And their punishment was a massive legal battle. These attacks on their livelihood had real teeth. Only after the war do you realize how many bullets whizzed right past your head. If even a single one of them had landed, it's a different life. Or perhaps no life. Murphy stands here on the other side of that fight. His story is most unusual. Bravery in the face of grave threats is one thing. Living to tell the tale is another, and Ian Murphy continues to do that. Ian Murphy has a story to tell, and we're happy to have him on the Enjoyer podcast. Ian, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. Appreciate you having me on.
Ian, we'll get you started with the easy one. We know you've had legal battles. We know living in this state is not the easiest it's ever been right now. But what do you enjoy about Michigan?
You know, I moved out here from Las Vegas, so this is a really easy question. I live right in Henderson, just a couple blocks down from some famous people. And I will tell you, there is one season there. Actually, there's two seasons. There's hot and hotter. Out here in Michigan, we get all four seasons. So that's a really easy question, especially up here in northern Michigan. Maybe not so much this last winter, but I'll tell you that getting to enjoy, I was in the golf business before I was a restaurateur. So I really got a chance to see some of the most beautiful parts of Michigan.
So did you find your way to Michigan or find your way back to Michigan?
I was born in Oregon, lived there for a little while, lived in Las Vegas for a few years. And then my stepmother was from the Troy area. So her parents had a home in Mishaway, which is a nice little enclave community right outside of Gaylord here. And they were retiring up north. So my dad and my stepmom decided to build a house up here in northern Michigan, and we moved from Las Vegas, metropolitan Las Vegas, to Gaylord, Michigan in November, waiting for the bus in the dark and the snow. And, you know, I find out you get a holiday, a day off from school to go hunting. I was like, what is this? I can deal with this.
How long ago was that?
Oh, gosh, that was 1987, roughly, I think. So I've been here a long time, graduated high school right here in Gaylord. So I've been a Michigander for quite a long time.
Ian, tell us about your legal battle. Like I said, you're one of those hammers that refuse to be smacked down by the nail. You put your name and your face and your business name out there. You took a great risk by taking on the state. What was the genesis of the fight? Where do things stand right now?
You know, the easiest way to answer the first part of that is I knew something wasn't entirely right. When the first executive orders, I got to be specific, the executive orders of March of 2020 that came out from Governor Whitmer, we shut down the Iron Pig. We did takeout. We, posted everything. We, did the right thing, as they say.
Oh, yeah.
And we barely survived. We didn't take any government bailout money at that time. Opened back up in May and had a fantastic summer, and then to get shut down again in November. For those that don't know, up here in northern Michigan, that's what we call our mud season. So we really rely on our firearm season up here and the tourist traffic that comes from those hunters and everything else. And basically on opening day up here, the governor shut down restaurants again. And we did it for about 7 to 10 days. And then our legislature went on vacation for the holiday season and decided not to act in any way or give any guidance for the holiday season to the restaurateurs specifically and their employees for how you're expected to make it through this season on a this week we're open, maybe next week we're going to be closed.
Right.
Now we're closed, but only maybe for a week to 10 days. So it really becomes hard to run a business on that kind of time frame and that scale like that. But I just fundamentally knew that with such a, quote, deadly disease, unquote, that we were going to curb it by sneezing into our arms, not picking our nose, not putting our fingers in our eyes, wearing masks, putting stickers on the floor, sign-in sheets, all these crazy things. I just thought that this doesn't seem right. Either this is really actually an emergency and we need to stay home,
right,
or we're going to let, some places open and other places not, and then you can go some places and other places not.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I decided to say, to heck with it, and I'm going to do the right thing, because the utility companies don't care if my restaurant is shut down by the government. We had, our insurance companies didn't come to the rescue. They got a bailout in 2008, but I asked my insurance company, well, surely we should have some coverage for this. And they said, no, it's not a natural disaster.
Act of God.
So
yeah, there's no acts of Big Gretch exception in your policy.
There really isn't. And, that was one thing. And I feel like it still really hasn't been addressed to this day. But fundamentally, I'm not anti-government, but I was raised in a way that, you should always question your government, especially in a respectful way. And in this instance, I didn't really know the best way to go about that. And ultimately what I did was I called the health department, our local health department, the gal that comes through here twice a year to do our health inspections. And I said, you guys are painting me into a corner, and I think we're going to have to open back up. And this happened to be the night before Thanksgiving, which is, a lot of people may or may not know, is one of the biggest bar nights, if not the biggest bar night,
absolutely,
in the bar and restaurant industry. So we were going to be without that night, among a bunch of other days, obviously, but that was the big one. I said, you know what? I'm putting my foot down. I would rather 6 months or 3 months from now, if I'm out of business, I would rather, and it would be easier for me to lay my head on my pillow at the end of the night and look at my wife and my family and go, I did everything I possibly could to keep my restaurant open. And I decided to call the health department, let them know, and 10:30, 11:15, about 15 minutes after we opened the next day, our local health department was here with a cease and desist order for me to close or face $1,000 a day fine if I stayed open.
Why'd you let the health department know?
Because I thought that was the right thing to do. That's a great question, because a friend of mine and I, in fact, I have pictures. We were, and I had seen some other bars doing this. We're right on Main Street downtown in Gaylord, it's M32, which, splits northern Michigan east to west up here. It's a relatively busy road. I was putting up wrapping paper on the windows to kind of hide the fact that we were going to stay open. And I just felt in my gut and in my heart and my soul that that was a little shady. And we were going to get caught. I mean, there was just no way around it.
You didn't want to be a speakeasy restaurant?
We actually could have done that too, because we do have, so I do a podcast. I'm sitting in our call it our studio, but I'm in my basement offices. So we actually could have done that, but it didn't feel right. And that wasn't the point. So I called our health inspector and I said, you're painting me into a corner. This is what we're going to do. They went out, got a cease and desist, and served me 15 minutes after open that next day. And I said, well, thank you very much, but I'm not going to close. And that started a cascading effect of multiple government agencies, the Liquor Commission, Michigan, my OSHA, which is a safety, employee safety health hazard.
Oh, yeah.
Department of Agriculture, and of course, the health department.
Agriculture?
Yeah. So the agriculture department actually ended up finding me. Well, they found me in contempt of court. They got a temporary restraining order against me because they asked me to close the restaurant because the restaurant was deemed an imminent threat, even though there was never once a single positive case of COVID, or a single contact trace from my restaurant from any of this. Even that would be slightly justifiable to me, that an employee here or even I had COVID. Any of those things to me would seem like some sort of justification. But the health department had to admit on the record that they had no contact tracing and no positive COVID cases here. So they were basically pulling me over for speeding when I wasn't speeding, when I said I was maybe going to be speeding, and they decided to pull me over. I mean, it was just so out of the norm for things.
There was no wronged party, right? Like no one had actually been
correct,
demonstrably harmed from.
Correct.
So you said that, opening with secrecy wasn't your thing. That wasn't the point. What was the point?
The point was there was a way that they were supposed to go about this, and notice was the way that they were supposed to. So in one of our court cases, in our early court cases, our hearings, our Administrative Law Hearing Act, we cite the Eaton County Health Department went around to sororities and fraternities that had known positive COVID cases and put a notice on the front door for you as an adult, James, when you are walking into that building or into that restaurant, it says there are known COVID cases in this place. So it's incumbent upon you whether or not you decide as an adult to weigh your risks to enter that building or restaurant or Home Depot or whatever it happened to be. That's what we thought our health department should have done.
Right.
And then the other portion of it is coming in, and if there are known COVID cases, how do you rectify that? These other things. What they decided to do was none of that. They went straight to, we're going to take you to court. Here's a cease and desist. We'll see you in administrative law court. And for people that don't know, the administrative branches, the Liquor Commission, the DNR, like all of these things, they all reside in the executive branch of government. And all of those judges are all appointed judges. They're not elected, they're appointed. We never once got a favorable ruling in all of our administrative law hearings. So they just piled on the agencies and said, we want you to comply. We don't want you to fix a positive COVID case. That would have been one thing.
Right.
They just said, we want you to comply. And I said, basically, no. And the health department sent the Liquor Commission to come take my liquor license because they know how difficult those are to get. Not everybody can get a liquor license, and they're very lucrative. So that was the big hammer, as you mentioned before, that they used on a lot of us licensee holders. So they came after my liquor license, gave me the longest suspension of any license holder in the state, 90 days, and a whopping $600 fine.
Because it was about the days, not the money.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. They reaffirmed that to me right away. So we did our timeout happily. I've never sold more soda, Coca-Cola, and Diet Coke in the restaurant than we ever have during that time. People came out in droves, sort of against the law, if you will, coming from 3 hours, 6 hours away just to support us. So we did our timeout, got our liquor license back. And then the Department of Agriculture came after me because I still wasn't in compliance. Dang it. That Iron Pig didn't shut down when we took their liquor license like we thought they would. So let's go after the food license. So they empowered the Department of Agriculture and James Padden to come after me, take my food license. So they took it. I closed. And then the governor opened restaurants back up to 25% capacity. This was, I think, maybe February of 2021 or somewhere around there. And I said, okay, well, which is it? Either my restaurant is an imminent threat and danger, or it isn't, because the governor and the health department is saying, well, COVID cases are residing and we can open restaurants. So I opened my restaurant back up. I had two conflicting orders. So they sent in somebody with a helmet cam or something like that, a hat cam, to get that I was actually open back up. And that same day they issued an emergency temporary restraining order because that darn Ian and the Iron Pig, they're still open, even though I told them to close, and they closed and they're back open. Well, which is it? So we went back to court, and down in Ingham County, a very nice judge, James Kennedy, I think is his name. We have him on record, so I don't know if you can see him wearing a shirt that says "Risk it for the brisket." Right. So a friend of mine came up with that during the whole shutdown, and we took a lot of grief for that. People thought, well, you're risking COVID to have brisket. And it's like, no.
Deadly brisket. I remember seeing tweets about that.
Yeah. there's, it's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff that we do, and this was kind of the beginning of it. And the judge is on record saying, risk it for the brisket. Ha, I like that. Juxtapose that with what one of these administrative law judges said. I've seen the slogan for the Iron Pig, risk it for the brisket. Should be more like brisket to die for. So you can see the hyperbole, from one to the other.
Right.
Wow. And Judge Kennedy was great, even though he did give me a 10-day timeout. He at least said, Mr. Padden from the Department of Agriculture, how does Mr. Murphy get his license back? He's a business owner. I understand these have consequences, but what is his path to getting his license back? So I'm grateful that he understood the levity of the situation, and we got to have a conversation with the Department of Agriculture, even though it was literally me writing a letter stating that I'm going to do each one of the things enumerated in the emergency order du jour. So ultimately, we got it back, paid, $1,500 in fines. And the Liquor Commission messed with me for about another year after that on some other things. But we're in the clear now with regards to where our lawsuit is now. So that's what the recent hullabaloo has been about, is all of this stuff that came about with the health department gave us an opportunity. Once we went through the ringer of the administrative law procedures, they issued a $5,000 fine for me being open all of 5 days, even though we were open in excess of 90 some days. So they could have got me for $90,000 plus. $5,000 fine, and we were open for 5 days. We appealed that. The Administrative Procedures Act, and I don't think the Attorney General's office really knew this, gives me an out. I have to go through the ringer first, but it gives me an out to go to my local court from an elected judge, which is literally right across the street from my restaurant here. So we appealed the $5,000 fine and said, listen, these statutes, what we call the gathering statutes, which was MCL 333.2253, which is the state health director's authority to, quote, limit the gathering of people for any purpose and may establish procedures. That's what they used to do curfews, to do the sign-in sheets, to do the stickers on the floor, all of the stuff they did after the executive orders were ruled unconstitutional. That's what they used to enable that. So Judge Hunter looked at that and said, yeah, according to INRI certified questions, which is Midwest Health versus, I believe, Bob Gordon and Governor Whitmer, that is ruling, the Supreme Court ruling from October of 2020 that took down the executive power that she had. So citing that, we were able to have Judge Hunter rule on the constitutionality of 2253, the gathering statute, and he wiped it out. He severed it from law. Then there's another court case, T&V Associates, which is a catering company, or was a catering company out of Macomb County. They brought an action in the Court of Claims and they lost. Hold that thought for a second. We win, ruling it unconstitutional. The health department, the state health department, immediately comes in and asks for an appeal. And then the next day immediately asks for a bypass application, which would jump the Court of Appeals and go directly to the Michigan Supreme Court to have them answer this urgent question, because it has serious ramifications for the state.
Right.
So they get a win in T&V Associates over in the Court of Appeals saying it's unconstitutional. We begin the briefing process. Michigan Supreme Court says, we're not going to hear it yet. We would like the Court of Appeals, if they want to hear it first. Court of Appeals decides to take our case, them appealing our win. So they start looking at everything. They look at the win they have over in the Court of Claims, and they say, you know what? We're good. We're going to let the Iron Pig appeal go. We're going to give up on that because we've got this win over here in the Court of Claims. So the Court of Claims in the 46th Circuit Court are a court of equity, relatively. So they figured, we got the win over here. We're good to go. No problem. There's no way that the Court of Appeals would ever overturn that. Well, guess what, James? Court of Appeals overturned the Court of Claims and published it.
They published it.
So there is a precedent now greater than my Judge Hunter ruling.
Right.
That says the gathering statute is unconstitutional. So we took all of these things back to Judge Hunter and said, by the way, They used a local statute. Before I mentioned 2253, this is 2453.
Right.
All you have to do is look at the statute and you take out state health director and insert local health director. The local health director may limit the gathering of people for any purpose and may establish procedures. He now has ruled that statute also unconstitutional, citing the exact same reasons that the state health director didn't have the authority, which is that the legislature in 1978, when they wrote this health law, gave too much authority to the executive branch to write law. They took may limit the gathering of people for any purpose and said sign-in sheets and curfews and only 12 people in your home, and it must be from your pod during Thanksgiving. I mean, all of these insane things. So here we are again. The Iron Pig has now taken 2 times power from the state. And I'm very curious to see how badly they want that power back, because the Michigan Supreme Court should hear the T and V, because the state is appealing that win. And then I'm almost certain that our local health department is also going to appeal this local win. So it's been almost 4 years of this stuff going on. And I kind of joke we had to fail our way to the top. And the 2 wins that we got were very, very big wins. So it's going to force the health department to do some things different.
They're huge wins, but I do have to say that as you talk, I'm not sure if it's the microphones, but I just keep hearing a cash register, cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. When you talk about lawyers, when you talk about all these different agencies, administrative, courts of law, how much has this cost you at this point? And how do those costs perhaps compare to if you just done nothing?
It has cost a lot, much more than I had ever anticipated. What's amazing to me is that I like to think of this as kind of a river, and we kind of jumped in the river sort of right at the right time. And there were some other people that were downstream from us, and there were some folks like Marlena's Bistro that were sort of upstream from us in certain aspects. And I got to see sort of how the Liquor Commission was going after places like Wood Chips Barbecue in Fenton, or Lapeer, and some of these other places, the Meeting Place, some of these other things, these other places. And we kind of got an idea of how to navigate these administrative law hearings. I had retained counsel prior to this. I bought out my partner just as COVID was really taking its toll. He decided to exit, so I bought him out. So I had already had my attorney involved, and he didn't have much experience, or I should say any experience with health code, a little bit of experience with health law and administrative hearings, certainly. I mean, he's been a local prosecutor. He's private practice now. But again, our naivete may have been one of our biggest weapons that we used, because, at the time, David Kallman had, is a rock star and helped Carl the Barber and some other organizations really make their way through. And I can't imagine what this would have cost me if I had to have such a high-powered attorney like that. Come to find out, I've got an arsenal in my attorney, David Delaney, sitting behind me, and has become such a student of the Michigan Constitution that, so just before we got on here, I'm on the phone because he had watched another interview and was like, I love how you put this, that, and the other, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, so I started looking at something and and it led down a rabbit hole about Carl the Barber. But anyways, we never once started a GoFundMe or a Give, Send, Go, because I saw how the courts were using and weaponizing those crowdfunding sources. So I have done things like sell t-shirts. We made, for good or for bad, Newsweek picked up on our Kiss Me, I'm Contagious t-shirt that we came out with during St. Patty's Day. We held a party in compliance with the health department, which of course they didn't note in the article. The Daily Beast ran with that one too, right-wing restaurateur. And then, they talk about Moms for Liberty and that.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a Republican. I'm a libertarian technically. I'm not even sure I want to label myself that anymore, but It's been interesting, and I'm grateful that I have an attorney that has understood my situation from the beginning and has taken pride in his efforts to help me and help everybody else, because he knows it's not just about me.
Yeah.
And he knew my motivation from the beginning wasn't about money. It was about my restaurant, my employees, my family, and the investment that we had made here. And it's on record, and it's actually state's evidence. Police body cam footage, police were in here multiple times, and I'm telling them I have a moral and fiduciary responsibility to my employees to get them paid. And the government let us down on that right from the beginning. And I said, well, I'm going to do it my way.
We talked about the official consequences. I mean, just government, just unloading both barrels, local, state, just anything they could, administrative. What are the social consequences? The unofficial, the perhaps, people lose friends in this kind of stuff. People might lose business connections in this kind of thing. What have been the social consequences of this fight and this persona that you formed as being, this fighter?
Yeah, and I love the way that you stated there towards the end, persona. It has, to a degree, I have sort of had to take on sort of this persona. And sometimes I get support from groups that I wouldn't necessarily say I would want support from, but, I may not exactly align with some of their ideals. For a quick example, January 6th, and I had no idea what was going on because I was dealing with liquor commission stuff at the time, and we were getting ready to put on what we called a Freedom Festival. We had a huge 300-person gathering, sort of against the law. And a friend of mine had come downstairs. At the time, my office was above the restaurant. I come downstairs and he goes, "Have you seen what's happening?" I said, "Well, what's happening?" He goes, "Well, they're storming the Capitol." I said, "No, they're not." He said, "Yeah, they are." Well, I didn't know, but apparently there was some Proud Boys or something at the restaurant that day, or that were there or something like that. And I don't align with their views, but they apparently aligned with what I was doing at the time. And, in a way I guess I was grateful for their support, but again, I don't, so it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, to kind of walk this line of, this is what I stand for, but don't interpret that to mean that I stand for these ultra right-wing things or some of these other things. And it goes the other way as well. I mean, I grew up as a Democrat for the longest time until, lo and behold, I started my own business about 25 years ago.
Some people, it's the first paycheck. Some people, it's when they start a business.
Correlation there.
It typically relates to how much of your life and your money you get to keep.
Yeah, exactly. That's a part of it. That persona portion is difficult to maintain in one aspect,
right?
But at the same time, I'm absolutely taking a ton of heat, from my friends. My family has stood beside me 100%. My sister is an ER and trauma doctor right here at our hospital here in town. And I've always said this for 4 years. If she thought for one moment that I was putting her or any of us or our community in danger by doing what I was doing, she'd come through the restaurant and she'd slap me. It's that simple. So I'm grateful for their support, but I absolutely have lost some friends, some business connections. Sure. What's interesting are the people that do voice support. So, we've done a festival. We're getting ready to do another music festival July 6th. And it's interesting, the people that want to support, but that will say, but I don't necessarily want my business name on the banner or whatever it is.
Really?
I think a lot of that is actually, sort of dying down, because, it is a polarizing position to take, whether, you're a vaccine or a mask or a government person. When you take a principled position and you stand up for yourself, your business, your employees, and your family, people don't always exactly understand that. And given the environment that we all participate in a social atmosphere and online, there's a real easy way, and the disconnect makes it even easier for people to voice that displeasure with me. I was doxxed on Thanksgiving in 2020. Pictures have been taken out front of my house. People have gotten a hold of my phone number. I've definitely lost a number of friends, but I'm really a big believer in that phrase. You'd rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. So, and the question has to be asked: were they really my friend to begin with? So, and I don't begrudge any of them for the position that they have. I just wish that they would not a single one of them have come to me and ever asked any questions about any of it. And that I find disappointing. But at the end of the day,
they ran with what other people said. They ran with things they read, rumor, conjecture, and not the person they actually knew.
Yeah. And, again, in this day and age with that disconnect, and when people are at home or forced to be at home and they're online all day and they see these things and they get ramped up, and, they take to the peer review sites and the Yelps and the Googles and those sorts of things, and will make multiple accounts just to voice their displeasure, and will say nasty things. And, you can almost see it coming for the most part. Anytime they mention the owner in one of these reviews, you kind of know where they're coming from. And
that's why they're leaving the review. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a little bit of fun with it now. So that's kind of how you have to roll with these things. You can't take it too seriously, because at the end of the day now, especially with everything that we know now, if they're deciding to still have that point of view, that's on them. That's their problem. That's on you to deal with in your life. Yeah.
1,000,000%. So we've had official consequences. We've had social consequences, business, all kinds of things. What have you gained from this fight?
That's a great question, James. What I have gained a lot. I've gained a lot of respect for people that do this in other capacities. Lawfare is a term that I'm just becoming familiar with, even though apparently I've been engaged in it for 4 years.
I've been going through it. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a newfound respect, if I can use that word maybe lightly, for, the legislative process. I have a newfound insight into how a lot of these processes work, what attorneys go through, what judges go through. They're not difficult questions that they get asked on these things. I have really learned that pay attention to the people that are clapping for you, not the ones that are rooting against you.
Right.
Because those are the ones that want to see you succeed. Those are the ones that are going to uplift you daily. Those are the ones that are going to keep you in the fight. I've got another friend that is going through something with the Department of Civil Rights right now, and she's just taking a beating. And even on a more hot button issue than this, if there could even be one. But you have to look at these things and categorize them and sort of silo them in a way, and just look at them all and then separate them and then put them back together and go, okay, well, this is how we're going to move forward. And if one thing I did really learn from the pandemic, when we had to market in 2-week stretches, as we did for a time, you really become nimble, and you really are able to turn on a dime on certain things and make quick decisions. The other thing I would say that I have gained is a tremendous following of people that do support what it is and understand that it's a fight for, not a fight against. I love my country.
Right.
I just don't like what our government is doing. I just don't like it. And that, in a nutshell, could be the answer to one of your questions earlier.
We have to be able to make that distinction. We do. We have to be able to distinguish between, we love Michigan, don't love the direction it's being led in. And those two things can be true at once. It doesn't make you a hater. It makes you a patriotic, concerned, involved citizen.
Yeah, and I even worry that word patriot, is getting sort of a bad name, if you will, these days.
We can't give it up. We have to counter signal. Because there are forces, and so the kind of people who take issue with the word like patriot would take an issue with strong father, strong leader.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're so right.
Anyone who is trying to promote the beautiful and the true is an enemy in their eyes.
Yeah.
And so to be painted in that negative light, this guy I follow on Twitter, Joshua Lysek, he talks about it all the time. Bad reviews from bad people are good reviews.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And there's just a lot of negativity, and it's so much easier to be negative than it is to be positive. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to excise that from your life. I mean, my wife doesn't really even read our reviews, and some of our employees do something. Again, we haven't hardly had, and listen, I don't tend to think or believe that my barbecue is the best in the entire state of Michigan or the entire world. It's very, very subjective, and I understand that. And there are people that are genuinely not going to like our quick service way that we order to counter in my restaurant. We use cherry wood to smoke. We have a sweet and savory barbecue sauce versus, a hickory smoke and some of these other things. So people are not going to like things about my restaurant. I get that. I understand that. Anybody that has very soft feelings, don't ever open a restaurant. A friend of mine just opened a new breakfast joint across the street, down a couple of blocks. And he's like, oh man, we got the worst review the other day. I was like, Jade, buddy, don't worry about it.
Yeah, if you think
you're not, you just won't be able to live your life like that. Just trust me. And that's where, my friend earlier, I might have mentioned it before, but I'll reiterate it again. In fact, he's sitting here right now. He told me when we were discussing these things, I said, I can't believe how nasty these people are. And he says to me, he says, how can they be so mad and angry and hateful? And he says, well, you have to remember there are two sides of the coin. One is love and the other is fear. And that kind of blew my mind because I was like, wait, I thought it was love and it was hate, right? I mean, that just seems sort of in general. He says, no, that hate is a byproduct of fear. So if you can figure out what somebody is afraid of or what this person is afraid of or what your friend that refuses to speak to you anymore because you took a stance against vaccines or masks or whatever, you're a Trump guy or you're not a Trump guy, whatever it happens to be. Figure out what it is that they're actually afraid of. And then you can better understand that hate and anger and all those other byproducts of that fear. And that was a huge lightning bulb moment for me because I was struggling. I just couldn't understand why people wanted to jump all over me and suspect that. I mean, it was honestly, James, you would think that I was killing grandmothers in Main Street or performing abortions in a basement illegally. It was that kind of vitriol that's
why. That's exactly why. That vitriol is meant as a deterrent. It is meant to take the tongue out of your mouth. It's meant to make you think twice every time you say, every time you tweet, anytime you speak up for yourself. Because think about it. These are miserable people. Happy people don't sit around trolling. They don't Yelp bomb accounts. Think about the healthiest person the mentally, stable people they don't spend their lives that way.
Right.
So these people are hurting for reasons that have incredibly little to do with us.
Yeah.
If you can muster a serious reaction and you've never met me or talked to me, you're not talking about me, you're talking about you.
Right. Yeah, and I've done a little bit of research on the topic because of this, and we've talked about it in my podcast before, and there's studies that come around, and it's the dopamine effect and some of these things, and they need that constant reinforcement, even if it's negative attention. It's there. It's that notification on the phone. It's that, I elicited a reaction from a complete stranger. Look what a snowflake, that kind of stuff. And I find that fascinating. And I struggle because I'm not sure that that's the right word, but it is in the time that we live in very fascinating in the way that it is especially being weaponized alongside with peer pressure. It's crazy. It's very, very crazy.
And you've given us so much of your time. I want to thank you. We'll get you out of here on this one. When I do make the pilgrimage up to Gaylord, when people who hear this make the pilgrimage, what do you get? Is it the brisket? Is it like what is the signature can't leave without it dish?
Well, I will tell you the number one seller across the board is the pulled pork sandwich, but I recommend anything with our brisket in it. It's amazing the brisket sandwich is the number one because in all of our other categories, anything with brisket, whether it's a brisket rice bowl, brisket egg rolls, or just our brisket platter in general, the brisket is the number one seller. But a lot of people do judge barbecue based on a pulled pork sandwich, and it is very ubiquitous. So I think, and it's a little bit cheaper. Let's be honest. People are out there hurting, and they do want to find one of the best values, and our pulled pork sandwich is a tremendous value. But if James is making the pilgrimage, my brother, I would suggest trying the brisket platter is probably the best way to go. Or if you're really hungry or you've got a +1 with you, try out the sampler platter because then you're going to get a little of everything.
Awesome. Ian, thank you for fighting the fight. Thank you for living to tell the tale. Thank you for telling the tale. And I do look forward to breaking brisket with you someday.
Absolutely. James, and I just want to say quickly, man, I do follow you. I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up what you're doing, because we need more voices like yours out there to bring these sorts of things to light. So keep up the good work.
Absolutely. If you could give us one more plug, tell us about Iron Pig Smokehouse. Tell us where you are. Tell us what you'd have people know.
Absolutely. So we're just off I-75 right in Gaylord. So it's exit 282. You're going to hang a right. We're right downtown. Anybody can look at our menu, ironpigsmoke.com. If you are not going to be able to make it up to Northern Michigan to try out the barbecue in the restaurant, we have a ton of sauce, spice rubs, and of course our t-shirts, things like that. The Kiss Me I'm Contagious shirt I mentioned from Newsweek before is all at ironpigmerch.com. And again, that is our main way, our big fundraiser, and how we're able to keep this battle going is all of the products that we sell through ironpigmerch.com. So if you got a few minutes, go there, check it out. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you, bud.
Thank you.